as far in the scriptures today. We're going to save verse 17 for next week, actually. So we're just going to look at verses. This is Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. So after Jesus is done giving the introduction, which was the blessings, now he starts in with the commands. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its salt flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then no good for anything but to be thrown out and be trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world, a city on a hill, set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are at the house. Let your light so shine before the men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Thus ends the reading. Thanks be to God. So we have looked at light a lot. In fact, I did one kind of a little bit on the salt light back when, and I thought, oh man, what am I going to say? It's literally like 3 verses. How am I going to make a whole sermon out of that again? And by the time I got done, there was still a lot that Jesus had to say that I wasn't thinking about. See, when Jesus did the blessings, he started out like nobody else had ever done. Because when the Pharisees or the scribes, Sadducees, whenever they would talk, or the Sanhedrin, it was always a list of rules. It was always do's and don'ts. It was always commands. Jesus starts something different. Instead of jumping right in on all the things you're supposed to do, he gives blessings. And he gives blessings to who? To the least of these. To the ones who were struggling. To the ones who didn't feel like they were good enough. The ones that didn't think that they mustered up. The ones that felt oppressed by all the rules. And so after he does this whole feel-good introduction, then he goes, okay, now we're going to get to the commands. But he does it differently. He's always talking in parables and in stories. This Sermon on the Mount, we're going to break it apart because it's difficult stuff. It can be very unnerving at times. It can step on toes, and there's some of it that you're going to go, I didn't get any of that. You know what? Jesus said the same thing to the people there. He said, this is not for everybody at this time. Some will get it, and some won't. Those who have ears, let them hear. Those who have eyes, let them see. If you don't get something, that's good, because he wants you to go home and he wants you to chew on it until he starts revealing the answers. So what we're looking at here, salt and light, it is a way of life, not just principles of life. This is a radical change, a radical transformation. This is how you're supposed to live out being a follower of Christ. Because if you really want to be a devoted follower, this is a new way. Now, when he gave this speech, he was actually up on the hillside of the Sea of Galilee, which is, it's all hillside, but there was kind of one area that they think is probably pretty much where he did it. We didn't get to go there this time, but the first time I went, we stopped. We didn't really get to get out and look, and that was interesting, because where he would have been standing, everybody else would have been down below. It was quite a distance, and if you know anything about who's there ever gone to the Grand Canyon, or been so like, have you ever done the hello, 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 it really echoes? When Jesus did the things he did where he did them, it was methodical. Because he didn't have to shout. His voice carried. Although I did like what the Chosen did when they showed this. They had then the disciples go and put people into groups of 100, 150, and they were scattered. So there's 12 of them, and they were scattered throughout. And so he would say something, and they would hear it, they would relay it to them. So that way they were able to hear what he had to say. So Jesus uses these metaphors to describe us. So he calls us the salt of the earth and the light of the world. What does that mean? You are and have the influence and impact globally. That's what he's really getting at. He didn't say you are the salt and the light of Galilee or of Israel. He said of the world. That's the first thing he wants to establish. That we are called to go out in the world. Now, he does not mean that every single one of us needs to go travel abroad to do this. What he's saying is the body of Christ collectively around the entire world is being that salt and light. So what does that mean to you? Just like I told the kids, it means it starts right where you are, right where you're planted, right in your household, right in your community, right in your schools, right in your office, right in your state. Some are called to go globally, but we don't have to go that far. He wants his followers to reflect him. And I've done that a lot with the light. You know, you can get more light out somewhere if you put a mirror to it, and it reflects. So when he talks about this salt and this light, this is actually a God-given mandate. I don't know if you ever really thought about that. This isn't a suggestion. But he's saying, if you're going to be my follower, this is a mandate. So what does that mean? It means to move out into our culture. Too many Christians like to sit on the sidelines. Have you ever noticed that? I'm a Christian, but I sit on my hands. How many people, when you go to a game, sit in the stands and sit on your hands and don't get plugged in? Okay, so my nephew, he's the last one out of our entire family, and my dad was bemoaning the fact that after 2 kids and 7 grandkids, all going through McCool next week, because they won sub-districts, they're going to districts, and we get to host it. But that'll be the last time that any of us get to sit in that gym for one of our kids. It's a whole other generation. My dad went there, he played sports, my grandparents went there. It's like, wow, yeah, this is really it, other than graduation, sitting in those things. Okay, it was sub-districts. It was close. We ended up winning at the very end by 3 points. Do you think we were all sitting on our hands just watching? No. It was pretty loud. And everybody was into it. I thought about that. We have no problem paying money to go somewhere, be a Nebraska football game, you pay a lot more money than you go to a high school game, sitting on the sidelines and being engaged. But what happens if you go to church where God calls you to get off the sidelines and get into the game for free? Are we as excited about it? You know, too many Christians think their faith is something to hold on to. I mean, you've heard about this. To be private about until they get to heaven. The mindset is not just about getting to heaven, but it's about influencing the world for Christ. I hate to say I have done way too many funerals for people where I have asked, it's like prying teeth even out of their family to even find out if somebody's been baptized. 9 times out of 10 they have been. Grandma's like, I don't talk about it. Well, what were some of their favorite passages or scriptures or hymns? I don't know. I don't talk about it. It was always a private faith. Private faith. Have you heard that? The problem is Jesus doesn't tell us to have a private faith, because that means you're just sitting on the sidelines. It means I have faith, but I want to go unnoticed. And Jesus is saying, the mandate is you are the salt and the light. You can't be unnoticed. I told you some of this is going to step on toes. But it's not my words, I'm just the messenger. Jesus is saying the mandate is you need to get out there and let people know. You know, I've heard this saying many times. If you were to die, or if you were to be convicted of being a Christian, is there enough evidence to convict you? He is calling true followers of the world to be bold, not embarrassed. Let me ask you this too, because I've seen this through the years. If people say, I noticed you. Are you a Christian? What's your answer? Is it like, yes ma'am or yes sir? Let me tell you about Jesus. Or is it, yeah? Do you go to church? Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Is that being bold? That's what Christ wants us. So as I said, the Sermon on the Mount is not for the faint of heart. So why did he use salt? In Jesus' day, it was a rare and precious commodity. Now this is going to be interesting because you're going to know some of this stuff and go, I didn't realize that. We take salt for granted. You've heard that one too. We're called to what? Cut back on salt. Cut back on our sodium. We have too much salt. Salt is everywhere. I can guarantee you that if I went to your house right now, you have salt shakers, right? And you probably have a big container of salt to fill those salt shakers with. Well, back then that was not the case. Salt was extremely rare. And in fact, the Roman soldiers were paid in salt for their daily wage. So they got the plunderings and everything when they went into villages and raided it, but then their actual wage, more times than not, was in salarium, which is salt. Guess where we get our English word salary from? It's salarium. So when you think about that, it's a lot deeper than what we thought. When some people say they're not worth their salt, what are they saying? You're really not even worth your day's wage. That's where I came from. They're not working up to par. If you take something with a grain of salt, you've heard that, right? How many have ever said that? What that's saying is one little grain, it's basically pretty worthless in a full deal of a day's wage. Salt was so sacred that if you spilled it, you were considered it was shameful or disgraceful thing. Yeah, I thought about that. Who here has ever heard the term, if you knock salt over, you're supposed to throw some over your back for good luck? I don't know where that came about, but you wouldn't waste salt. It was disgraceful. Here's something you may not know, and you can Google this up. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper, and when he painted it, he painted Judas knocking over the salt cellar or the salt shaker, because it was a disgraceful thing to spill the salt, and he was conveying that what Judas was about to do to betray Jesus was that disgraceful, or more. So salt has 14,000 uses that I just randomly found right off. It raises the boiling point of water, but it has the opposite effect. It lowers the freezing point of ice. Who here has ever made homemade ice cream? Yeah, we did some, but I used to do it a lot with my grandpa. And he had one of those old ice makers, and it was electric. But I remember after Grandma got all the stuff put together in the canister, and he'd stick it in there with the ice, and he had this big bag of ice salt, and he would put it in there and sprinkle and syrup, because it made it colder faster. Salt removes rust. It puts out grease fires. Who here knew that? I didn't. I told my daughter, because she had a fire in her apartment like a week ago, and I said, why didn't you just put the lid on it? Well, I panicked. I didn't think about that until I took it outside, and she burned herself. And yeah, the pot's no more. But I said, next time, throw salt on it or put the lid on it. It actually makes candles dripless. Have you ever had dripless candles? That's what does it. It's salt. It keeps cauliflowers fresh, and it kills poison ivy. It treats sore throats and earaches and sprains. Did you know that wars have literally been fought over salt? In fact, in the Civil War, they fought over the salt mines to use them to their advantage. In 1864, the Union Army dismantled the salt mine in Virginia. Now, why was this such a big deal? Sorry, I gotta get something to drink. I apologize. I had a sore throat for the last couple days, and my thing's not on. Done now? Okay. This is why it's all written out, because Kristen was afraid she was going to have to give this. I woke up and I said, I think we're good. So the Union Army took this over, and why was that such a big deal? Because you needed the salt to what? Cure meat? So you had food. But they also used salt to cure leather, to make shoes. Guess what? If you owned the salt, your enemy could not. You had to control the food, and you had to control the shoes. It's kind of hard to fight a battle without either of those two. So salt has been one of these items throughout history. In biblical times, it has to be put into the grain offering, that's in Exodus, and as part of the incense. I'm sorry, it's Leviticus, and the incense is in Exodus. Do we have a cough drop? I thought I had brought one, I didn't. So then we look at light, and some of the light is visible, but did you know the majority of the light on the spectrum is not visible? How about animals? Animals can see light on wavelengths that we cannot see. It's kind of like sound waves. We know that they can hear them because they react, even though we can't hear them. But that light moves across the whole magnetic spectrum. We have radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, thank you. X-rays, which is, I was in radiology, and gamma rays, they're all part of the ultraviolet spectrum. Light travels at 186,000 meters per second, or miles per second. So for you to get light from here to the moon only takes 1.25 seconds. Think about that. So if Jesus is telling us to go be the light of the world, and you go, well, how can I do that? If you were holding a mirror and you set light, it takes 1.25 seconds to go from here to the moon. Do you not think that Jesus could spread that light around this world? In the Bible, light is mentioned more than 250 times. The first time is the first command that God gives in Genesis 1:3. What? Let there be light. And the last time, as in the last book, Revelation 22, the last chapter, verse 5, there will be no more night. There will be no more need of light, of lamp, or the light of the sun. For the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. 1 John 1:5, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. In John 8:22, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and he who follows me shall not what? Walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Having light in the Bible is a metaphor for what? Having truth, having God, and having Jesus. Darkness is the opposite of that. Walking in darkness, you are walking in the world and not in the truth. John 3:19-20-21 says, this is my verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. Anyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that they may see plainly that which they have done, that have been done in the sight of God. So why would Jesus use these metaphors, salt and light? Well, they have a couple things in common. Salt and light are both needed to sustain life, right? Depleted sodium levels in a human body, if you get too low, it's hyponatremia, and it can result literally in death. You know that without athletes, or if you've been outside and you're working hard in the sun and you're sweating really bad, what do they tell you to do? Electrolytes, go drink some Gatorade. Go get not just water, you need sodium. When you're dehydrated, they take you, what do they give you? Sodium. And what? Light without, light without natural light, vegetation dies. People who live in dark, wintry climates, think about Alaska, where they have half a year where it's all dark. People literally have to sit under grow lights, so to speak, right? Because they will become completely depressed. They will get super sick. You need that light in order to sustain life. As salt and light, which is a necessary element of life, we should be giving and offering hope to corrupt and dying world. That's really what this is all about. The metaphor of the corrupt, decayed, infected world. What does God call us to do? To be that hope. You know, in English, we have one word for life. But in Greek, there are two. There's bios, which is the physical. It's the biology. I think that's a problem with English. We have one thing that covers everything, you know, like love. We just have one love. You know, I love cheeseburgers and I love you. You know, totally different. Same thing with here. We have one word for life. Greek, there's two. Bios, there's difference. Because bios is where biology comes from. That's our earthly, that's our natural life, the state. But then there's Zoe, which is the eternal life, the soul. That's huge, because what happens to bio's life? It dies. It's going to die. I hate to be a newsbreaker. You're all going to die at some time. But the Zoe is your soul that's going to live for eternity. Here's the question. Where's it going to live at? Where is your Zoe going to be for all of eternity? Is it going to be in heaven, Christ? Or is he going to look at you and say, I do not know you? They both have purifying, healing qualities. Salt is a good antiseptic. Light actually is a disinfectant. Kills germs and bacteria. Ultraviolet light technology has been around, believe this, for over 100 years. Just 15 minutes of ultraviolet C destroys the DNA of mRNA, all the very different viruses out there, just by shining a light on it. They're now using those lights in subways, in city offices, in schools. They use light for many dermatology conditions, laser therapy for treating scars and surgeries. And what is salt? It's an antiseptic. A salt, what? They say salt in the wound. Why do they do that? Because it kills bacteria. It can be used in meat because it slows the growth of bacteria. Well, all I can say is since my husband started smoking things, and not just the house, but he's been smoking things, we discovered that they've created something called bacon salt. Oh, yeah. Now we're talking. You take your pork and you put this bacon salt all over it, and it just dissolves in. And what does it do? It doesn't dry it out, like your country. Yeah. It brings the good stuff out. It makes it juicier. It makes it flavorful. Yeah. Just a little tidbit, so if you want to go home, you might want to try that. Well, anyway, all this is to say that the world and the world systems are what? Infected. We live in a corrupt culture. So when we stand for righteousness, it has a purifying effect in our world. And we promote biblical values, it has a purifying effect in our world. And when we humble ourselves as Christians and pray and seek God's face as agents of both salt and light, it has a healing effect across our nation. This is where Jesus was saying that, and actually most people don't realize it was hooked to 2 Chronicles. You've probably heard this a lot. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sins and I will heal their land. All of humanity has been infected with a common contagion, and it is called sin. We're all dying of this common contagion. What do we have to offer the world? As salt and light is a remedy to that disease. A remedy, of course, is Jesus, and we bring healing wherever we sprinkle Jesus. I love that. They both have penetrating properties. Salt penetrates food and gives flavor, and light penetrates the darkness and makes it bright. They both invade the space that they're in. John Stott, he's an Anglican theologian in 1911, he said, "If a house is dark at night, there's no sense blaming the house. That is what happens when the sun goes down. The question to ask is, where is the light? If meat goes bad, there's no use blaming the meat. That's what happens when bacteria is allowed to breed unchecked. The question is, where is the salt? If society becomes corrupt, like a dark night or bad food, where is God's people with the salt and the light?" It's a song we're about to sing. You don't have a light and put a basket over it or a bushel. You don't hide it, right? What good would that do? You have a dark night, dark house, you're going to let your light so shine before others. This is what Jesus is calling us to do. Because ultimately, he has charged us to be the salt and the light. My challenge to you is, are you going to boldly do that? Or are you going to choose to just sit on your hands and be a spectator?